I once thought family was the safest place, until the night they raised their glasses in a toast, then secretly slipped evidence into my backpack. They wanted me to fall. I quietly turned the tables, slipping the truth back into the pocket of the one who set the trap. Just minutes later, the police stormed in, red and blue lights flashing against the walls, panicked eyes turning toward me. I stood up, calmly raising my hands, letting them search. Nothing, not a single trace of what they expected to find. Because in this game, the hunter had now become the prey. Hello, my name is Lucas Cooper. I'm 33 years old, living in a small apartment in downtown Atlanta, Georgia. I'm the chief accountant at Redmont Energy and Infrastructure, the energy and infrastructure conglomerate run by my family. Sounds glamorous, doesn't it? But if you look deeper past the polished veneer of wine-soaked galas and perfectly staged family photos, you'll see a different truth. A truth I've long since learned to accept. I don't belong in their world. My family, or rather the Cooper family, lives in a lavish mansion in Hollowbrook Heights, Springfield, Tennessee. It's a place where pristine white walls gleam under the sunlight, the gardens are manicured to perfection like a painting, and every door is heavy with pretense. My father, Derek Cooper, 63, is the chairman of Redmont. He's a tall man with meticulously groomed silver hair and a deep, steely voice as cold as steel itself. To him, honor and the family's image are everything. The truth? It only matters if it doesn't tarnish the Cooper name. I've never seen him smile genuinely, except when he's standing before shareholders or signing a multi-million-dollar deal. At family dinners, his gaze always made me feel small, as if I were a mistake that needed fixing. My mother, Vivian, 58, is the epitome of elegance. She always appears in expensive dresses, her hair perfectly curled, and a practiced smile that conceals any real emotion. But I know that behind that facade is a woman living in fear. Fear of losing her place in high society, fear of the whispers behind her back at charity galas. She always tries to smooth over any tension in the family, but I can sense the unease in every brush of her hair or gentle word. She never stood up for me when I needed her, but I don't blame her. Perhaps she's just trying to survive in the world my father built. And then there's Colin, my younger brother, 28, the director of project development at Redmont. Colin is the kind of person you'd notice immediately in a crowd. Radiant smile, tailored suit fitting him perfectly, and a confidence that borders on reckless. He's ambitious, but that ambition often leads to impulsive decisions. Colin spends money like water, from sports cars to extravagant vacations in Europe. I've heard whispers in the company about his debts, about unaccounted expenses in major projects. But to my parents, Colin is the light, the hope, the one who will take Redmont to new heights. Me? I'm just the one in the background, checking numbers, fixing mistakes, and keeping everything from falling apart. Hollowbrook Heights, where my family lives, is a world apart from my modest apartment. It's a place where every house looks like a palace, every party is a performance, and every smile is calculated. Every time I step into that house, I feel like I'm entering a theater where everyone plays their part and I'm the only audience member without a script. I still vividly remember the last time I was there, a few months ago, for my mother's birthday party. I wore a simple suit, not quite fashionable compared to the other guests, who sparkled in their exorbitant outfits. My mother smiled at me, but her eyes quickly moved on as if I were a stranger. My father merely nodded, saying nothing, while Colin slapped my shoulder with excessive enthusiasm, as if trying to prove something. "Big brother, long time no see," he said, his voice loud enough to draw a few glances. I gave a faint smile, knowing full well that his friendliness was just an act. That night, as everyone grew tipsy and laughter filled the room, I stood alone on the balcony looking down at the garden. The moonlight cast shadows on the flower beds, making them look like smears of blood on the grass. I wondered when the last time my family truly talked to each other, not about the company, not about appearances, but about ourselves. Maybe never. I felt like an outsider, a puzzle piece that didn't fit into the perfect picture my parents had carefully crafted. I'm not one to complain. I like clarity, precision, and above all, honesty. Maybe that's why I never truly fit in with my family. They live in a world where the truth can be bent as long as it serves a greater purpose: reputation, power, image. But I can't live like that. I work with numbers every day, and I'm grateful for them because they don't lie. They don't pretend. They're the only thing in this life that makes me feel safe. Every morning I wake up in my small apartment in Atlanta, brew a cup of black coffee and sit in front of my laptop screen, where the numbers tell a story that no one in my family wants to hear. Redmont Energy and Infrastructure, my father's pride and joy, is teetering. Over the past few years, the regional energy market has plummeted, oil prices have crashed, major infrastructure projects have been delayed, and the multi-million-dollar contracts my father once boasted about have become financial black holes, swallowing millions of the company's dollars. I see it as clear as day in the balance sheets: glaring red numbers, overspent budgets, and mounting debts. But whenever I try to speak up, all I get is cold silence or disdainful looks. Colin, my younger brother, is at the center of this storm, though no one dares to admit it. As the director of project development, he has the authority to make major investment decisions and secure lucrative contracts. But Colin is not a cautious man. He invests recklessly in unfeasible projects, spends money like it's pocket change, and worse, I've heard rumors that he's been greasing the palms of the wrong partners, people who promise the world but deliver nothing but trouble. I've tried to warn them, not just once. In internal meetings, I stand up, my voice calm but firm, presenting the numbers, the risks, the red flags I've uncovered. But every time, my father, Derek, just looks at me with a steely gaze. "You only understand numbers, Lucas," he says, his voice cutting like a knife. "You don't understand vision." Vision. The word echoes in my mind like a mockery. What is my father's vision? An invincible empire bearing the Cooper name? A Redmont that shines in the headlines despite the cracks within? Meanwhile, Colin is praised as the one who dares to take risks for the future. He strides into meetings with a confident smile, spinning grandiose tales about new projects, about game-changing opportunities. The shareholders nod approvingly, my father smiles with satisfaction, and I just sit there gripping my pen tightly, trying to stay calm while knowing that Colin's promises are pushing Redmont to the brink. The financial pressure is mounting. Some shareholders have started asking tough questions, their sharp inquiries ringing out in meetings. Why has the Savannah project gone over budget by double? Where did the $5 million for the Nashville partner go? I want to answer, to point out Colin's mistakes, but every time I open my mouth, my father or Colin cuts in, redirecting the conversation. And then, as if following a scripted play, they start blaming me. "Lucas needs to keep better control of the financial reports," Colin says smoothly, as if he's rehearsed it. "Maybe the accounting department missed something." My father nods, his eyes suggesting that I've failed to keep the company in order. I feel like I'm being suffocated. Every night I come home with a heavy head, open my laptop and review every number, every transaction, as if I could find a way out. But the deeper I dig, the more I realize something is wrong. Some expenses are hidden, recorded under vague codes. A few internal accounts I once had access to are now locked. I tried asking Colin, but he just laughs, patting my shoulder like I'm a child. "You're worrying too much, Lucas. Everything's under control." But I know nothing is under control. Something is being concealed and I'm being pushed to the sidelines. My relationship with my father, already cold, has grown even more strained. In one rare moment when I confronted him directly in his expansive office at Redmont's headquarters, I asked point blank, "Dad, is there something I'm not being told?" He looked at me, his gaze piercing, and replied, "Lucas, your job is to keep the numbers right. Don't try to do things beyond your capability." His words were like a slap. They didn't just hurt. They made me realize that to him I was never truly part of the Cooper family. Colin isn't any better. He doesn't just brush me off. He provokes me as if my attempts to warn them are a joke. Once, when it was just the two of us in the meeting room, he looked at me with a smirk. "You know, Lucas, sometimes you should learn to stay quiet." Not everyone wants to hear the truth. I wanted to shout, to punch that smug face, but I held back. I'm not Colin. I don't act on impulse. I need evidence. I need the truth. My mother, Vivian, senses the tension between us. She tries to mediate, as she always does. One afternoon, she called me to the mansion in Hollowbrook Heights. She sat across from me in the grand living room, holding a teacup, her voice soft but laced with worry. Lucas, don't let things go too far. Our family needs to stay united. I looked at her, wanting to say that this family has never been united, that I've always been the outsider. But I just nodded, knowing my words wouldn't change anything. My mother has a way of smoothing things over with sweet words, but she can't fix the cracks that have been there for years. As the days pass, I feel like I'm walking on a tightrope, ready to snap at any moment. Every morning I step into the office with a sense of unease, as if an invisible blade is held close to my throat. I know Redmont is on the verge of a crisis, and I know I'm being positioned as the one to take the fall. But I can't stop. I keep digging, reviewing every transaction, every email, every small piece of the chaotic financial puzzle of the company. And every time I find something suspicious, a transfer with no clear origin, a contract that's been altered, my heart beats faster, not out of fear, but because I know I'm getting closer to the truth. After weeks of tension, where every day at Redmont felt like a silent battle, my phone buzzed one late afternoon. It was my mother, Vivian. Her voice over the phone was gentle, unusually so, as if she were trying to soothe a child. Lucas, darling, tomorrow night we're having a small family dinner at Hollowbrook Heights, just to mend things. You'll come, won't you? I gripped the phone tightly, a wave of unease rising within me. Mend things? Our family was never truly close enough to need mending. But there was something in my mother's voice, a rare fragility that made me hesitate. A part of me wanted to believe things could be different, that we could sit down and talk like a real family. Another part, deep inside, whispered that this wasn't just a dinner. I took a deep breath and replied, I'll be there, Mom. The next afternoon, I drove through the winding roads leading to Hollowbrook Heights. The familiar scenery unfolded, lush green trees, lavish houses resembling palaces, and the Cooper mansion glowing brilliantly under the sunset. I parked in front of the gate, gazing at the sparkling glass windows, feeling as though I were stepping onto a preset stage. The dining table was impeccably set in the grand hall, with pristine white tablecloths, gleaming wine glasses, and perfectly arranged bouquets of red roses. But what startled me was the guest list, not just family but major Redmont shareholders and a few key executives. The atmosphere was too perfect, too flawless, to the point that it sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't a family dinner. This was a performance. As I stepped out of the car, my phone vibrated lightly in my pocket. A text from an unknown number. Be careful, Lucas. Someone wants to harm you. My heart stopped for a second. I glanced around, but all I saw were the staff bustling about with preparations, and the mansion's lights casting long shadows on the driveway. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, trying to maintain a calm expression. But inside, every nerve was taut as a wire. Who sent this message? And who wanted to harm me? How would they do it? I had no answers, only the quiet resolve to walk toward the house, where a trap was waiting for me to step into. Inside, the dining room was filled with laughter and the clinking of wine glasses. My father, Derek, stood at the head of the table, dressed in an elegant black suit, his deep voice resonating as he greeted everyone. My mother, in an emerald silk dress, glided among the guests with her perfect smile. Colin, as usual, was the center of attention, telling some story that made the shareholders burst into laughter. I stood in a corner of the room, a glass of wine in hand, trying to blend into the atmosphere, but my eyes never stopped scanning. Everyone was smiling, conversing naturally, but something felt off. My father's smile was too stiff. Colin's glance at me was too fleeting, and my mother, though she lightly patted my shoulder when I arrived, quickly turned away to chat with a shareholder, as if my presence was just part of the script. Derek and Colin took turns urging me to drink. Come on, Lucas, a toast of family. Colin said, raising his glass, his smile radiant but his eyes cold. My father nodded, adding, "We all make mistakes, but family is where we forgive." The words sounded warm, but they sent a chill down my spine. Family? Forgiveness? They had never spoken to me like this, not during tense evenings or contentious meetings. I took a sip of wine, nodded, but in my mind that anonymous text kept replaying. I excused myself to use the restroom. As I turned to head back and grab my backpack from the dining table, I caught sight of Colin approaching it, leaning down and unzipping my bag to slip something inside. His movements so quick they were almost imperceptible. My heart pounded, not out of fear but because a suspicion was taking shape. I pretended not to notice, but in my mind pieces were starting to connect. While Colin and my father were engrossed in conversation with a major shareholder at the head of the table, I quietly returned to my backpack. My hands trembled slightly as I unzipped it, flipping through a few work documents, and as I suspected, there was an unfamiliar envelope tucked between the papers. I opened it carefully, ensuring no one saw. Inside was a contract for a partnership with a rival company of Redmont, bearing my signature, but I knew it wasn't mine. There was also a bank card and a USB drive. I took a deep breath, feeling as though the blood in my veins had turned to ice. They were setting me up to look like an embezzler, a traitor, the one responsible for Redmont's losses over the years. All the shady expenses, the failed projects, they wanted to pin it all on me. I closed the envelope, my heart racing, but my mind had never been clearer. I glanced around. Colin was still laughing, my father nodding to a guest, my mother busy with her wine glass. No one was watching me. I quietly slipped the envelope into the inner pocket of Colin's jacket, which was hanging on a nearby chair. My movements were swift, silent, undetectable. I returned to the table, flashing a faint smile as if nothing had happened. But inside, I knew. The game had just begun and I had no intention of losing. As the party reached its peak, the chandelier's shimmering light reflected off crystal glasses, and the soft strains of a violin blended with the idle chatter of shareholders. My father, Derek, stood at the head of the table recounting a story about the early days of Redmont in his deep, commanding voice. My mother, Vivian, glided among the guests, her smile impeccable but her hands trembling slightly as she poured more wine. Colin, as usual, was the center of attention, laughing loudly, clapping a shareholder on the shoulder and promising game-changing projects on the horizon. I sat there, quietly observing, feeling like a predator stalking its prey, waiting for the perfect moment. And then it came. The music abruptly stopped, as if someone had pulled the plug on the entire world. The dining room doors swung open and 2 police officers stepped in, their dark blue uniforms stark against the opulent surroundings. Behind them was a middle-aged man in a suit, wearing glasses and holding a stack of documents. He introduced himself as a representative from the Georgia Financial Investigation Office. The room fell silent. Smiles froze on the guests' faces. A few shareholders exchanged confused glances and whispers. I felt Colin's eyes dart toward me, but I maintained a calm expression, as if nothing surprised me. The representative stepped forward, his voice clear and cold. "We've received a complaint from Redmont Energy and Infrastructure accusing Mr. Lucas Cooper of embezzlement and unauthorized transfer of internal assets." A murmur rippled through the shareholders. I heard the faint clink of my mother's wine glass as she nearly dropped it. My father stood rigid, his face impassive, but I noticed the corner of his mouth twitch. Colin, standing a few steps away, feigned shock, clutching his chest as if in disbelief. "Lucas? Unthinkable," he said, his voice high-pitched and theatrical. I stood up slowly, feeling every eye in the room on me. My heart pounded, but not from fear. I looked directly at the representative, my voice soft but firm. "I haven't done anything wrong. If you'd like, go ahead and search. I have nothing to hide." A heavy silence blanketed the room. I saw Colin glance at our father, a fleeting look of panic crossing his face, but he quickly regained his confident demeanor. My father nodded to the officers, saying, "Do your job. We want the truth to come to light." The police began their search. They opened my backpack, flipped through every document, checked my laptop, my phone, even my wallet. I stood there, hands in my pockets, watching their every move. Nothing. Not a single piece of paper, not a trace of anything implicating me in wrongdoing. One officer shook his head at the representative. "There's nothing suspicious here." I saw Colin frown, his eyes beginning to waver. My father remained still, but I noticed his hand clench into a fist. They didn't understand what was happening, but I did. I stepped forward, my voice still calm but edged with steel. "Perhaps you've been looking in the wrong place. If there's a complaint, there must be evidence somewhere. I suggest you check Director Colin Cooper." The room fell silent again. Colin let out a forced laugh as if I'd said something absurd. "Lucas, are you joking? I have nothing to do with this." My father's brow furrowed, his eyes boring into me as if I'd crossed a line. "Don't waste everyone's time, Lucas," he said, his voice low but commanding. But I didn't waver. I locked eyes with Colin, giving him a cold smile. "Just check. If there's nothing, I'll apologize." Colin shrugged, feigning confidence, even urging them, "Fine, go ahead and check. I have nothing to fear." An officer approached to inspect Colin's belongings. And when he reached the jacket hanging on a chair near the dining table, I stood there, my heart pounding. Not from worry, but from certainty. I knew exactly what they would find. The officer reached into the inner pocket of the jacket and, like a scene from a movie, pulled out a brown paper envelope. He opened it, withdrawing a set of contracts bearing Redmont's logo, a bank card, and a small USB drive. The air in the room instantly froze. All eyes turned toward the table. One shareholder frowned, glancing at the contract's cover. "Wait, these are documents for transferring Redmont's internal funds?" Another lowered their voice, stunned. Are these evidence of embezzlement?" The silence lasted a few seconds before spreading like a storm. Colin lunged toward the officer, snatching the papers, his eyes wide with panic. "What is this? I don't know anything about this." He flipped through the pages rapidly, and when he saw the signature, my forged signature, his face went pale. My father stood motionless, but I saw his face drain of color as if the blood had left his body. My mother, Vivian, nearly dropped her wine glass, her hands trembling, her eyes looking at me in confusion. "Lucas, what's happening?" she whispered, but I didn't answer. I stepped forward, my voice clear, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I didn't betray Redmont, but someone in this house did, and they tried to pin it on me." I looked straight at Colin, then at my father. Their eyes, panic, anger, helplessness, were all I needed to know I'd won this round. Colin stammered, trying to defend himself. "That signature. It's Lucas's. He's trying to frame me." But I shook my head, my voice steady. "That's a forged signature. I demand a thorough investigation. The truth will come out." The police documented the evidence, sealing the envelope. The shareholders began murmuring, their suspicious glances now fixed on Colin and my father. One of them, Gregory Grant, the second largest shareholder, stood up, his voice trembling with anger. "If this is true, this is a scandal. Redmont cannot go on like this." The honor that Derek and Colin had built their lives around crumbled in that room, in front of the very people who once respected them. My mother sank into a chair, hands covering her face as if she couldn't bear to watch her family fall apart. I looked at her, feeling a pang of pity, but I couldn't stop. I had been cornered, branded a criminal, and now I was merely taking back what was mine. I stood there, my gaze no longer angry but filled with cold liberation. I didn't need to shout or accuse. The truth had done that for me. The police left, taking the envelope and the bewildered stares of the guests with them. The party dissolved in silence. Colin and my father stood there, motionless like shattered statues. I turned and walked out of the room, feeling their eyes on my back. The air in the Hollowbrook Heights mansion was heavy as lead, but as I stepped outside and breathed in the cold night air, I felt a strange sense of relief. Not the joy of victory, but the feeling of someone who had just broken free from chains. The morning after, news of the incident spread like wildfire within Redmont Energy and Infrastructure. Whispers echoed through the hallways, internal emails, and frantic phone calls between shareholders. Colin Cooper is involved in embezzlement. Did Derek know about this? Did Lucas save the company, or is he just seeking revenge? I heard those questions, but I didn't care. All I wanted was for the truth to come to light, no matter how bitter it might be. The board of directors called an emergency meeting at the company's headquarters in downtown Atlanta, a sleek glass building with Redmont's polished logo gleaming at the top. As I walked into the meeting room, the eyes of the shareholders and representatives from an independent audit firm fixed on me. The atmosphere was stifling, as if everyone was bracing for an explosion. My father, Derek, sat at the head of the table, his black suit still impeccable, but his eyes lacked their usual steely edge. Instead, there was tension, a rare sight in him. Colin sat beside him, trying to maintain his confident facade, but his hands gripped the edge of the table as if clinging to the last scraps of his honor. My father opened the meeting, his voice low but missing its usual commanding presence. "Last night's events were merely a misunderstanding," he said, his gaze sweeping over the shareholders as if seeking their agreement. "We will clear everything up. Redmont remains a strong company." But his words lacked conviction. A major shareholder, Gregory Grant, cut him off. If it was a misunderstanding, why was the evidence found in Colin's jacket? How do you explain that, Derek? The question struck like a knife, and my father hesitated, his eyes wavering. He began to mention something about internal errors, but his voice faltered, devoid of its usual strength. The shareholders pressed forward with relentless questions, each one sharp as an arrow. Where did the $5 million for the Savannah project go? Who approved the contracts with questionable partners? Lucas warned about irregular expenses long ago. Why was no one listening? I sat there, silent, listening as each question pieced together the puzzle I had been trying to assemble for so long. Everything I had said, every warning I had given was now laid bare on the table, not to praise me, but to expose the mistakes of Colin and my father. Colin tried to stay composed, standing up with a smile I knew was fake. "I think this is an accounting process error," he said smoothly, though his eyes darted nervously. "The finance department probably failed to maintain proper oversight." I nearly laughed at his audacity. The finance department, meaning me, had been sidelined from major decisions and locked out of critical accounts. But I said nothing, just watched him, letting him dig his own grave. An independent audit representative raised a hand, their voice cold. "We've reviewed the documents. The irregular expenses were all approved by the Director of Project Development, Mr. Colin Cooper. There's no evidence implicating Mr. Lucas Cooper." The room fell silent. Colin opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. My father lowered his head, rubbing his forehead as if searching for an escape. But there was none. Under mounting pressure, the board made its decision. Derek Cooper, chairman, and Colin Cooper, director of project development, were temporarily suspended pending investigation. I was appointed as interim chief financial officer and acting director of development, replacing Colin. Some major shareholders, who had once stayed silent when I raised concerns about the company's issues, now openly supported me. Gregory Grant stood up, his voice firm. "Lucas has been trying to protect Redmont for a long time. I propose an independent investigation into all of the company's operations. We need transparency." Colin couldn't take it anymore. He shot to his feet, pointing at me. "He's manipulating everything. He set me up." But no one believed him. The shareholders looked at him with suspicion, and my father remained silent, unable to speak. I stood up, my voice calm but clear. "I'm not seeking revenge. I just want Redmont to get back on track, transparent and clean." My words echoed through the meeting room, and for the first time I felt I was no longer an outsider. The meeting concluded, and Redmont's internal communications issued an official statement. The board of directors had temporarily suspended Derek and Colin Cooper, appointed me as interim director, and named Gregory Grant as interim chairman. I returned to my office carrying the weight of the meeting's aftermath. Standing by the large glass window, I gazed out at Atlanta, bathed in the glow of midday sunlight. The Redmont logo on the wall shimmered, a symbol of the responsibility I had long carried in the shadows. As I was lost in my thoughts, the office door suddenly swung open, yanking me back to reality. Derek and Colin strode in without knocking, without a word of courtesy. My father, still in his black suit, had anger etched across his face. Colin, standing behind him, had eyes sharp as knives, as if they could pierce right through me. The air in the room grew thick, as if the entire world knew this conversation would not be easy. "Lucas," my father began, his voice low but trembling with restraint, "do you think you've won? Do you think you can destroy this family and walk away like nothing happened?" I stood there, meeting his gaze directly. "I haven't destroyed anything," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "I only protected Redmont, something you and Colin failed to do." Colin let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "Protected? You're just a jealous nobody, Lucas. You were never good enough to stand on my level, so you resorted to dirty tricks to push me out." He stepped closer, pointing at my face. "You're a traitor, an ungrateful wretch." I felt a surge of hot blood rushing to my head, but I held it back. I had learned long ago not to let emotions take over. "If I'm the traitor, then why was the evidence found in your jacket, Colin?" I asked, my voice icy. He froze, unable to respond, glaring at me with seething hatred. My father cut in, his voice like a growl. "Enough, Lucas. You have no right to act superior to us. You don't deserve the Cooper name." I furrowed my brow, about to respond, but then he continued, and his words struck me like a dagger to the chest. "You're nothing but a bastard, an ungrateful wretch who repays kindness with betrayal." Those words exploded in my mind. The room seemed to stop moving. Colin stood there, silent, but a glint of satisfaction flickered in his eyes. My father turned, pulling Colin out of the room, leaving me standing alone in the empty space. The door slammed shut, but the echo of those words reverberated in my head. Bastard, ungrateful, repaying kindness with betrayal. I sank into my chair, my hands trembling slightly, trying to process whether those were just words spoken in anger or a truth I had never been told. Memories of my childhood flooded back, sharp like shards of broken glass. I remembered dinners at the Hollowbrook Heights mansion, where I was just a quiet boy in the corner, listening as my parents praised Colin for the smallest things. A drawing he made, a witty remark. Meanwhile, no matter how hard I tried, I only received cold looks or my father's scolding. "Lucas, don't speak unless you can uphold the family's dignity." Once I accidentally spilled a glass of water at a party, and my father dragged me to a private room, berating me as useless, nothing like anyone in this family. Back then, I thought he was just angry, but now those memories pieced together into a terrifying picture. I recalled the times I was punished for minor mistakes, as if I was always the one at fault, despite my best efforts to please my parents. Colin was different. He could make mistakes, squander money, or botch a school project. But my parents always defended him, as if he were the family's only light. I had grown used to being pushed to the sidelines, but now my father's words made me wonder. Did I truly not belong to this family? Was there a secret they had hidden from me for 33 years? I sat in my office, the midday sunlight still streaming through the glass, but it no longer felt warm. Inside me, a seed of doubt had sprouted, growing with every heartbeat. I tried to focus on work, on the numbers on my screen, but my mind was pulled back to the past, to the cold looks, the harsh words. I needed answers. I needed to know the truth. In the days that followed, I felt like a ghost. I still went to the office, reviewed financial reports, and attended shareholder meetings, but my mind was elsewhere. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Derek's contemptuous glare, Colin's mocking smile, and my mother's evasive gaze. I began noticing details I had never considered before. How my father always called me Lucas instead of son. How my mother looked at me with a mix of pity and distance. How Colin was always favored despite being unworthy. Everything now formed a hazy picture, but I knew I was getting closer to an answer. I couldn't sit still any longer. I needed to go to the Hollowbrook Heights mansion, where my father kept all his secrets, from company contracts to the hidden corners of our family. But I couldn't just show up without a reason. If my parents were home, they'd grow suspicious immediately. I called Grace, our longtime housekeeper, and learned that my parents were attending a charity event and would return very late. The opportunity had arrived. I drove through the winding roads to Hollowbrook Heights, my heart pounding as if it might burst from my chest. The mansion came into view, glowing brightly but eerily silent, like a lavishly decorated tomb. The staff opened the gate, nodding in greeting, and I stepped inside, trying to maintain a normal expression. I told them I just needed to visit my father's office briefly, and they nodded, leaving me alone. I went straight to Derek's office, a grand room lined with redwood bookshelves and a massive desk. I rummaged through drawers, flipping through medical records, insurance contracts, and property documents. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear of being caught, but because I knew I was touching something forbidden. Finally, in a locked drawer, I found an old file sealed with red wax labeled Evelyn Monroe. My heart seemed to stop. Evelyn Monroe, a name absent from my memory, yet it sent a shiver through me as if I had heard it in some distant nightmare. I broke the wax seal and opened the file. Inside was a birth certificate for a child named Lucas Monroe, with a birth date matching mine. Mother, Evelyn Monroe. Father, unknown. I turned the page, my hands shaking. A handwritten note in Derek's firm script read, "Adoption procedures completed. No one is to mention this." The name Evelyn tightened a knot in my chest. I suddenly remembered, years ago during an argument between my parents, I had overheard my mother, her voice choked with emotion, say, "You can't keep escaping your sister's death by pretending Lucas, that child, never existed." I sank into the chair, feeling as though the world was crumbling around me. The fragmented memories, Derek's cold stares, Vivian's avoidance, Colin's contempt, now formed a complete picture. I wasn't Derek and Vivian's biological son. I was the child of Evelyn Monroe, Derek's sister, someone I had never known. I was a stain the Cooper family had tried to hide, an illegitimate child adopted to protect the family's reputation. I took the file back to my apartment, placed it on the kitchen table, and read every line, every number, as if staring long enough might change them. But they didn't. The truth lay there, cold and undeniable. I felt anger, humiliation, and a deep, hollow emptiness. I understood why I had never been accepted my entire life. I wasn't a Cooper. I was a secret, a burden, something they kept to conceal their shame. A few days later, I arranged to meet Derek and Vivian at the mansion. I didn't call ahead, only sending a brief text. "We need to talk." When I stepped into the living room, my mother was seated on the sofa, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes filled with worry. My father stood by the window, his back straight, but I noticed his shoulders trembling slightly. I didn't beat around the bush. I placed the file on the table, my voice calm but sharp. "I know everything. I'm not your biological son. I'm Evelyn Monroe's child." My mother let out a small sob, covering her mouth. My father turned, his eyes no longer angry but eerily calm. "So you found out," he said, his voice even, as if discussing a business deal. "Evelyn was a stain on our family. A foolish girl who got pregnant out of wedlock, bringing shame to our name. We adopted you to cover it up, to give you a life you didn't deserve. You should be grateful." I felt a surge of hot anger. "Grateful?" I repeated, my voice trembling with rage. "Grateful for being treated like an outsider my whole life? Grateful for the scolding, the contemptuous looks? Grateful for being used as a tool to protect your reputation?" My mother burst into tears, but my father only smirked, his voice turning venomous. "Evelyn was a failure, and you're no better than her. You think you're above us, Lucas? You're nothing." The conversation turned into a battle. For the first time in my life, I shouted, no longer holding back. "I don't need your Cooper name. I don't need this family." I turned and walked out of the mansion, not looking back. My mother called my name, her voice breaking, but I didn't stop. I was done maintaining this relationship. They had taken 33 years of my life, and now I wanted to reclaim myself. A few weeks after the confrontation at the mansion, the official investigation results from the Georgia Financial Investigation Office were released. I received an email from Gregory Grant, the interim chairman, early one morning as I sat in my apartment with a cold cup of coffee. The report was over 200 pages long, but the first few lines were enough to make me stop breathing. Derek and Colin Cooper had manipulated financial records, set up secret funds, and conducted a series of unauthorized internal transactions to conceal Redmont's losses over several years. Every piece of digital evidence, emails, digital signatures, transaction logs, pointed directly to them. As for me, Lucas Cooper, or rather Lucas Monroe, I was completely exonerated. The report confirmed that I had been framed, with Colin orchestrating the plan to pin the blame on me, with Derek's tacit approval. The news spread like wildfire. By noon, Redmont's internal chat groups were buzzing. Employees whispered in the hallways, shareholders made frantic calls, and local Springfield media began publishing sensational headlines. Cooper family falls, corruption and betrayal at Redmont. The Cooper family, once a symbol of prestige and power, was now branded with corruption and betrayal. I thought I would feel vindicated, but I didn't. There was only an emptiness, as if everything I had ever known about my family had vanished. The board of directors called an emergency meeting shortly after, in the largest conference room at the Atlanta headquarters. The atmosphere was stifling, as if the entire world was holding its breath. The large glass windows reflected the morning sunlight, but the light did nothing to ease the tension. Shareholders sat around the long wooden table, their faces a mix of anger, confusion, and disappointment. Senior staff, once loyal to Derek, now lowered their heads, avoiding each other's gazes. Gregory Grant, seated at the head of the table, tapped his pen lightly on the surface, creating sharp, dry sounds like a countdown to an inevitable verdict. Mr. Grant opened the meeting, his voice low and sharp. "We have the official investigation report. Derek and Colin Cooper have caused severe damage to Redmont. I want to hear everyone's opinions." His words opened the floodgates, and the shareholders immediately spoke up. An older woman, Margaret Klein, a longtime shareholder, stood up, her voice trembling with anger. "Millions of dollars have vanished. The projects we placed our trust in Colin are now worthless paper. Why wasn't this stopped sooner?" Another, Thomas Reed, chimed in. "Lucas warned about irregular expenses 2 years ago. Why didn't we listen to him?" The questions were like daggers, and I sat there, silent, feeling the weight of the truth bearing down on those who had once sidelined me. No one represented Derek or Colin in the meeting. They had been suspended, and their absence only underscored their guilt. A younger shareholder, David Patel, turned to me, his gaze sharp but not hostile. "Lucas, you saw these issues long ago. What do you think we should do now?" I took a deep breath, stood up, and spoke calmly but firmly. "We need transparency. Every transaction, every contract, every expense must be reviewed. Redmont cannot move forward without rebuilding trust." The room fell silent, and for the first time I felt their gazes shift from suspicion to respect. The meeting ended with an irreversible decision. The board unanimously voted to terminate Derek and Colin Cooper from all positions within the company. They were also required to sell their entire shareholdings to compensate for the damages. Mr. Grant looked around the room, his voice ringing like a verdict. "Redmont will not collapse. We will rebuild, and Lucas Cooper will lead this process." I was officially appointed as the Director of Restructuring, tasked with steering Redmont back on track and restoring investor confidence. I didn't seek revenge or appear in the media. While the press hounded me for a sensational headline, I immersed myself in work. I started with the smallest tasks: reviewing contracts, cutting unnecessary expenses, and renegotiating with partners to salvage projects on the brink of failure. Every day I stayed in the office late into the night, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating my tired face. I checked every number, every transaction, just as I had done since starting at Redmont. But this time, no one dismissed me. No one told me I only understood numbers. I hired an independent audit team, instructed them to review all financial records, and made every financial report transparent to shareholders. I wanted Redmont to be clean, transparent, with no room for secrets or lies. Under my leadership, Redmont began to stabilize. Stalled projects like the Savannah infrastructure development were restarted with stricter terms. I personally met with investors, listened to their concerns, and promised that Redmont would not repeat past mistakes. Shareholders started to return, some even sending emails thanking me for saving the company. Employees who had once feared losing their jobs now worked with renewed spirit. I saw them smile more, talk more openly, as if a dark cloud had lifted from Redmont's sky. During an internal meeting a few weeks later, Mr. Grant stood up, looking at me with a rare smile. "Lucas," he said, his voice resonating through the room, "you've accomplished what no one thought possible. Redmont is coming back, and it's thanks to you." The shareholders applauded, some standing, and I saw their eyes filled with admiration. I nodded, offering a faint smile, but inside I didn't feel like a hero. I was just Lucas, the man who fought for the truth and was now trying to rebuild from the ashes. But even as Redmont began to stabilize, a void lingered within me. The file bearing Evelyn Monroe's name still sat on my kitchen table in the apartment, a constant reminder that my story was far from over. I still didn't know who my real mother was or why she had vanished from my life. One late evening, as I left the office and stepped onto the neon-lit streets of Atlanta, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. "If you still want to know the whole truth, come to the old cafe by the Hollowbrook River. I'll be waiting." I froze on the sidewalk, my breath catching in my chest. This number, I recognized it immediately. It was the same one that had sent the warning about the setup at the Hollowbrook Heights mansion dinner, the message that saved me from Colin's trap. My instincts told me this was no coincidence. Someone knew the truth, and they wanted me to know it too. I held the phone, my fingers hovering over the screen, hesitating. Was I truly ready to face the final truth? Was I prepared to turn the last page of my own story? But then I took a deep breath, slipped the phone into my pocket, and drove toward the Hollowbrook River. The night was pitch black, with only the faint glow of streetlights illuminating the road to the old cafe, a small rundown place nearly forgotten amidst Springfield's affluent neighborhoods. When I pushed open the door, the smell of roasted coffee mingled with the dampness of a recent rain. The cafe was empty except for a middle-aged woman sitting in a far corner by the window. She wore a simple wool coat, her silver-streaked hair framing a gaunt face, but her eyes, those eyes were strangely familiar, as if I had seen them somewhere before. She looked up as I approached, and my heart seemed to stop. "You've grown so much, Lucas," she said softly, her voice trembling but warm, like a melody echoing from the past. I stood frozen, the world around me ceasing to move. Evelyn Monroe, my biological mother, was no longer a vague name on a birth certificate, no longer a shadow in my lost dreams, but a living, breathing woman sitting before me. Before I could speak, she raised a hand, her frail, trembling fingers brushing my cheek as if afraid I might vanish if she let go. Tears streamed down her face. "It's really me," she whispered. "I've watched you every day, every year, but they wouldn't let me near you. They said if I tried to take you back, they'd destroy us both, so I disappeared. I let them think I was dead just so you could live safely." Her voice broke on the last words. My chest tightened, a tidal wave of emotions surging within me. Shock, pain, and a fierce longing I hadn't realized I carried. I sat down across from her, gripping the edge of the table to steady my trembling hands. Everything around me blurred, leaving only her face, a face where I saw traces of myself. "Mom," I whispered. The word slipped out naturally, as if it had been waiting in my heart my entire life to be spoken. She burst into tears, grasping my hands and pressing them to her chest. "I'm so sorry, Lucas. For everything. For the years you had to endure loneliness in that Cooper household. You didn't deserve to live like that. I couldn't speak. I only held her hands tightly, the first time, perhaps the only time in my life, that I truly knew what it meant to come home. As her tears dried, Evelyn told me her story. Her voice was calm, but it carried the weight of years of suppressed pain. Many years ago, when she was pregnant with me, a scandal erupted in the Cooper family. She, Derek's younger sister, had fallen in love with a man the family deemed unacceptable. When she became pregnant out of wedlock, Derek saw it as an unforgivable stain on their name. He forced her to leave the city, live under a new identity, and even stage her death to protect the family's reputation. In exchange, he adopted me, giving me the Cooper name, with the promise that I would have a worthy life. But it wasn't kindness. It was Derek's way of controlling the narrative, hiding the truth, and keeping the family's image pristine. "I never wanted to leave you," Evelyn said, her eyes brimming with tears. "But Derek gave me no choice. I could only watch you from afar, through articles about Redmont, through secret trips to Springfield, just to catch a glimpse of you. And I was the one who sent you that warning text at the dinner. I couldn't let them destroy you." I sat in stunned silence, tears welling up. I hadn't realized I was crying until I felt the hot tears streaming down my cheeks. "I just wanted you to know," she said, her voice breaking. "You were never my mistake." I stood, walked around the table, and enveloped her in a hug, the first embrace in over 30 years. Under the dim cafe lights and the sound of rain pattering against the windows, all the pain, resentment, and hurt seemed to melt away. I was no longer Lucas Cooper, the outsider in a deceitful family. I was Lucas Monroe, Evelyn's son, and for the first time I felt I belonged somewhere. After that meeting, I convinced my mother to leave the small town where she had lived in hiding for years. I found a modest house in the Atlanta suburbs, with a shaded garden and a porch scented with jasmine. On the day she moved in, I stood at the door watching her pull a small suitcase along the stone path, sunlight glinting off her silver hair like a halo. The house wasn't grand, but it was warm, with windows that welcomed light and a small kitchen fragrant with the smell of wood. On the first morning, I woke early, brewing coffee, its rich aroma filling the house. My mother stood in the garden holding a watering can, tending to the daisies she had brought from her old town. I stepped outside, handed her a cup of coffee, and we stood there, silently watching the sunlight filter through the leaves. "Do you like daisies?" she asked, her voice gentle, as if it were the most important question in the world. I smiled, feeling my heart lighten for the first time in years. "I do, Mom. They're like you. Simple but strong." She smiled, a smile that lit up her gaunt face, and I realized this was what I had been searching for my entire life. Not fame, not power, but these quiet moments with someone who truly loved me. We sat on the wooden bench on the porch, sipping coffee and talking about small things. The taste of the cookies she used to make, the riverside road in her old town, or how she secretly followed my life through Redmont news articles. I told her about my years in Atlanta, about the numbers that saved me from Colin's setup, about how I fought to keep Redmont afloat. She listened, her eyes filled with pride, and I knew that even though I wasn't Lucas Cooper, I was still her son, and that was enough to heal every wound. In the days that followed, the small house became my sanctuary. Every evening after leaving Redmont's office, I drove here, not to the cold apartment in downtown Atlanta. My mother would wait with a simple dinner, potato soup, toasted bread, or a plate of boiled vegetables. We ate under the warm glow of a yellow lamp, the gentle clink of cutlery against plates, and for the first time, I felt like I was home. Her garden began to bloom, vibrant yellow daisies mingling with pale purple lavender. I started learning to care for plants, to recognize each flower, and every time she showed me how to prune branches or water them, I felt like I was learning how to live again. One morning, as the sun just began to rise, I stood in the garden watching my mother kneel by a flower bed, her hands gently caressing the petals. The chirping of birds mingled with the soft breeze, and I realized this was the peace we both thought we'd never have. I was no longer an outsider, no longer burdened by the Cooper name. I was Lucas Monroe, and I had found my family. Not within the polished walls of Hollowbrook Heights, but in this small house, with the mother who had sacrificed her life to protect me. But the journey to this point wasn't just about finding my mother. It was about finding myself. The years of pain, the battles against deceit, and the moments of facing the truth taught me lessons I will carry for the rest of my life. That evening, sitting at the kitchen table under the warm glow of a yellow lamp, I picked up a pen and began to write. Not financial reports or contracts, but thoughts about what I had been through, messages to myself and to anyone searching for light in the darkness of doubt and hurt. My life, with all its scars and victories, taught me that no matter how rough the road, there is always a way to stand up and keep moving forward. I learned that integrity is a flame that never goes out. At Redmont, I fought to protect the truth, not for fame or power, but because I believed a company or a person cannot survive if built on lies. When I stood up in shareholder meetings, when I refused to retaliate against Derek and Colin, I chose the path of integrity. There were nights I stayed awake, wondering if I was throwing myself into an unwinnable battle. I vividly recall sitting in my office, the laptop screen casting light on my weary face, checking every number, every transaction, knowing that the people I called family were trying to destroy me. But each time I signed a transparent report, each time I refused to compromise with lies, I felt the flame within me burn brighter. Integrity isn't just about doing the right thing, it's about doing the right thing even when no one is watching, even when it costs you everything. Let integrity guide your path, no matter how difficult it may be. Don't let lies, however tempting they seem, sway you. When I uncovered Colin's plot, I could have stayed silent to protect so-called family ties. But I chose to speak out, and that not only saved Redmont but also saved me. Believe in your own worth, and don't let anyone make you feel that honesty is a weakness. Every time you stand up for what's right, you're building a stronger version of yourself. I also learned that every wound can heal if you give it time and love. The years of being sidelined, treated as an outsider, and betrayed by the Cooper family left deep scars within me. When I discovered my true identity, when I confronted Derek and Vivian in the cold living room of the mansion, I thought that pain would forever be a part of me. I remember the nights I sat alone in my apartment, staring at Evelyn Monroe's file, feeling as if my heart was being torn apart. But then I found my mother, Evelyn, and in the simple moments with her, like watering plants together or drinking morning coffee, I realized my heart was healing. Not because I forgot the past, but because I learned to love myself and let my mother's love help me mend. My advice is to be patient with yourself. Don't try to hide your pain. Let it exist. Let it teach you how to be stronger. When I stood in the garden watching my mother tend to her daisies, I understood that life isn't about erasing scars, but about learning to live with them and finding joy in the small things. Give yourself time and open your heart to love, from others and most importantly, from yourself. I closed the notebook, set the pen down, and looked out the window. The moonlight illuminated the garden where my mother's daisies quietly bloomed in the darkness. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew I was ready. Not as Lucas Cooper, who once lived in the shadow of a deceitful family, but as Lucas Monroe, who had found light in truth, love, and himself.